When we talk about proteins, most people are familiar with protein as a macronutrient. You think of protein as necessary for building muscle. Some of you might think of protein as 4 kilocalories per gram. And some of you might even go deeper and understand that proteins are comprised of their constituent amino acids. Yet we continue to have this argument, debate, in the fitness space about which proteins are good, which proteins are bad, which proteins are better or worse, optimal. We add all these superlative qualifiers to the protein, almost in a dismissal of what we previously defined the protein as. So let's get into it. Like I said earlier, proteins are comprised of amino acids, and that constituency will determine the protein's function. So you could have a protein like a piece of chicken, but things like enzymes are also proteins. Now, one thing to understand is that in the process of digestion, that piece of steak or that piece of chicken or that piece of tofu you eat doesn't stay that way once it enters your GI tract. One thing to not so much debunk, but just make sure people understand, like if you eat a piece of steak or a piece of chicken or a piece of tofu even, or drink a whey protein shake, it's not like you get whey and then copy paste that onto your bicep and then bicep fixed, bigger bicep. That's not exactly how it works. What happens is you eat something, a protein thing specifically to our conversation, it gets broken into its constituent amino acids, and then, depending on the need, those amino acids are then reformed into whatever structure is required of them at that time, be it a muscle, be it an enzyme, be it whatever the case. So, what I want to illustrate with this video is that amino acids, you should think of them almost like letters in the alphabet or characters in a language. So, using this analogy, there's 26 letters in the English alphabet, right? There's roughly 20 different amino acids that make up the proteins in the body. There's something like 500 total, but in our, as human beings' body, there's only roughly about 20. So if those 20 amino acids are roughly equivalent to the 26 letters of the alphabet, when you think of a complete amino acid, so like chicken, steak, fish, tofu even, right? Whey protein, casein. These are like your words that have an even mix of vowels and consonants, so you can make a bunch of useful words out of them. It's like reaching in a Scrabble bag, and chicken is something like construction, right? Or family. So you have like an F, a C, an O, an A, an M. So you could break construction or family apart, and with those two things, like say construction is chicken and family is like steak or something, you can make a bunch of other words with the letters that you were given in those two words. Does that make sense? But then you have other words that might require like an X or a Z or something like that, right? So these are your other protein sources that have kind of like novel proteins, you know, like some of your various plant proteins and seeds and things like this that, you know, you don't eat in large quantities or necessarily consider the best quote-unquote bodybuilding proteins. That's where you get those like off letters that you may need to make certain words. So what I'm trying to say, folks, is this is the case for a balanced diet, however, leaning mostly on those complete protein sources that you can get the most use out of per unit volume of quote-unquote letters. Because most of the major things that you need to survive are built up of those kind of commonly used vowels and consonants that you get from your complete protein sources. But that doesn't mean that the offhand ones don't have their uses as well. What that also means, the biggest takeaway from this video, is that we shouldn't necessarily be campy about are sources of nutrition, because in the context of the Scrabble bag, it all has some value. You never know when you might need to spell a word with an X or a Z. Because remember, optimal is a unicorn. As living organisms, the needs of our biology are constantly changing, and so our nutritional inputs to sustain those needs need to adapt with them as well. Consistency is a superpower. Stay in the fight.